The mask slips with Tibet. How wonderful mass immigration is, and yet there are to this day public protests to free Tibet and recognition that Chinese displacement of the Tibetan population is an immoral act. Obviously, China isn't going anywhere. Nobody's going to go to war with the largest economy and military in the world to save Tibet. But there is a recognition that what China is doing is an aggressive act. Nobody says this to the Tibetans. Maybe the Tibetans are better off with all those Chinese. They need to learn that the world isn't Tibetan. It's all sorts of people, and they need to get used to it, because that's the new reality of a globalized economy. It's inevitable. You can't turn back the clock on this. Besides, you Tibetans will all benefit mightily from the increases in diversity. Nobody ever says this about Tibetans or to Tibetans, but this is always what they say to whites. The paper, Weapons of Mass Migration, Forced Displacement as an Instrument of Coercion. It documents 64 instances of the use of mass immigration to compel another state or non-state actor to do what they want you to do. One colorful example from the paper involves Jimmy Carter's negotiations with China regarding quote-unquote human rights. Quote, consider, for example, the suggestive reply of then Chinese Premier Deng Xiaoping to US President Jimmy Carter during their historic 1979 meeting. After Carter asserted that the United States could not trade freely with China until its record on human rights improved, and Chinese were allowed to emigrate freely, Deng smilingly retorted, okay, well then, exactly how many Chinese would you like, Mr. President? 1 million? 10 million? 30 million? Whether Deng actually intended to influence US behavior remains unclear, but in point of fact, his rejoinder reportedly stopped Carter cold and summarily ended the discussion of human rights in China. Two more examples from Greenhill's paper. The Haitians. In summer 1994, for instance, boats were, quote, being prepared in nearly every village along the southern coast of Haiti, close quote, in an explicit attempt to, quote, put more pressure on the US to hasten the return of Aristide. As one villager noted at the time, quote, we cannot get arms to fight. The only way to fight is to get the Americans to keep their promises. The only way to do that is to do what they fear most. Have us come to America. East Germany threatening to send South Asians to West Germany. Quote, likewise, when East German officials quipped in the mid-1980s that their West German counterparts claim they have a liberal society over there, let them prove it, they fully anticipated that loosing South Asian asylum seekers on West Germany would cause widespread discontent and persuade the previously reluctant West German government to concede to their demands. And they were right. One of the crimes attributed to the Germans at the Nuremberg tribunals was the mass immigration of Germans to ethnically French and Polish territories with no regard to pre-war immigration restriction to these territories. Obviously, these were not treated as high on the war crime scale as the mass murder, but they were treated as a lower-level war crime. To impose mass immigration against the will of the population was recognized for what it was, a martial act. Similarly, Russification programs that involved mass immigration of Russians into Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states, and Kazakhstan were used in anti-Soviet propaganda as just one aspect of Soviet brutality. Of course, it took a backseat to the Soviet slave labor concentration and extermination camps, or gulags, as they came to be known, but mass Russian immigration against the will of the people already there was considered just one more aspect of the brutality of the Soviet regime. Though in fairness, the Soviet regime did not enact this kind of policy between the years of 1923 and 1945. The Aryan invasion theory was originally a theory about mass human migration from modern-day Afghanistan into northern India. It wasn't concerned with military conquest primarily, though that may have happened from time to time. It was primarily a mass immigration called an invasion. These people back then intuitively understood mass immigration as a kind of invasion. We can also look at Muammar Gaddafi's views on the matter. Quote, tomorrow Europe might no longer be European and even black, as there are millions who want to come in. We don't know if Europe will remain an advanced and united continent or if it will be destroyed, as happened with the barbarian invasions. These are things that Gaddafi said as he threatened to open the borders of Black Africa through to Europe if he wasn't given billions of euros. But tut-tut, Gaddafi. Don't you know that Africans will only enrich and enhance Europe? We also see normal, non-conditioned thought regarding migrants from Eastern European countries. In Poland, there was a debate in the government on whether to accept a certain quota of Arab and African migrants or to face economic sanctions from the European Union. The Poles chose sanctions. The reasoning being that you can recover from a financial loss. You cannot recover from mass African or Arab migration, at least not without doing some very hard things. Why would Merkel have to threaten countries with sanctions in order to take Arabs and Africans? If these people are the asset that the Merkelites say they are, shouldn't Merkel's attitude be, well, your loss, some more for us? The mayor of Calais and then economic advisor Emmanuel Macron threatened to let all the migrants through to the UK if the UK didn't agree to accept some of the African migrants at the Calais camps. Well, golly, don't the French know that these Africans are actually a great prize to be cherished? That their very survival depends on them? It seems like in the moment the mask slipped and it was candidly revealed that having a large African population in your country is a very bad thing. The Merkelites will pontificate and give platitudes about the wonders of diversity, but when you look at their actions, at some level, they know that bringing in these people into a country is a punishment of your country. Let's say you're the king of the United States and you decide to be such a nice person, you're so nice, and you open your borders to Brazilians. Okay, so now here's the area of the map that Brazilians have access to, and here's the area of the map that European Americans have access to. Or let's say that you're a really nice guy and you open the borders with Mexicans. Okay, here's the area that they have access to. Here's the area that European Americans have access to. Or Chinese immigrants. Here's what they have. Here's what you have. The Chinese don't let you in for the most part, unless you have something they really want. And they certainly don't let you vote in their elections and make their rules that they have to live under. But they'll come to your home and start voting in elections that affect you and tell you how to live. And you have nowhere to go. And when they enter into the United States, okay, so now the Mexican people have, say, 10% of the United States in terms of political power through their voting power, and 100% of Mexico. Imagine if European Americans closed their border with Mexico, but started mass migrating to Mexico, and were able to get into Mexican universities with lower marks than what the native-born Mexicans had to get. And they also got special tax breaks for having white-owned businesses. And other businesses in Mexico had to employ a certain percentage of white Americans in order to be eligible for government contracts. Or they might have to face diversity lawsuits if they don't have enough white Americans in their company. And they're legally required to employ a certain percentage of white Americans, and whites have to make up a certain percentage of stockholders in Mexican companies. All of this is going on in the United States, except it is the Mexicans who get these advantages at the expense of white Americans. They get special consideration for university access, the equivalent of around 185 SAT points, and a proportionately similar advantage across the rest of the application. It's minority-owned businesses that get special tax breaks and government handouts. And companies like Abercrombie and Fitch must hire a certain proportion of brown people due to a court settlement. Or Coca-Cola is required to have a 7-man watchdog group to make sure Coca-Cola doesn't hire too many white people. If Europeans ever try to do this kind of stuff to a non-European country, it would be called, at the least, colonialism, but would be recognized as a kind of racial supremacism that would have made the British Empire blush. But when Mexico does it, it's called left-wing tolerance. The way I describe the situation here is not strange, it is not backwards, it is a timeless and correct understanding of the nature of mass immigration. When the Ottoman Empire expanded in all directions into Southeast Europe, or more colloquially called the Balkans, when they conquered a territory, they would mass migrate Turks into the area and take skilled and learned Christians, the valuable ones, and suck them out of the Balkans into Istanbul. And they would even sometimes do this with hostile Muslim ethnic groups like the Kurds. And they would of course help themselves to the lands of the Christians and put Turks in charge of government, though they didn't necessarily have enough intelligentsia to fill out an entire bureaucracy. So here we have Mexico, the 11th largest economy in the world, and the 10th largest population in the world. By all rights, a great power state, getting about $26.1 billion in remittances from Mexicans living in the United States, which, while only 1% of Mexico's GDP, is 1% on the top. Think of it like 1% profit. And in addition to this, they of course get all of the legal and financial privileges of being a non-European in the United States that I outlined earlier. The net fiscal effect of Hispanics in the United States from taxes paid minus government services received was about negative $291 billion in 2014. This is after assigning all military spending to whites, and it's assuming that all non-entitlement costs are equal between the races. It assumes that Hispanics do not use a disproportionate amount of police or special education or any other kind of lower level government service. And Mexican Americans in particular, if anything, are probably a bigger net cost than the other Hispanic groups are on a per capita basis. But even if Mexican Americans weren't any worse than other Hispanics, their net cost of having these people in the United States is probably around $195 billion, given that they make up about 67% of the Hispanic population in the United States, and given my extremely generous assumptions of assigning all the military to whites and assuming no racial disparity in government use in non-entitlement government services. The kinds of things Mexico is doing to the United States are the kinds of things that the Ottoman Empire had to fight wars to impose on other states, or that the original caliphate had to fight a war to impose upon Spain, or that the Mongols had to fight wars to impose upon Russia and China. And turnabout, 1,000 years later, the Russians had to fight a war to impose upon the Central Asian populations. When the Russians conquered Central Asia and the little-known Siberian Emirates, they then did population flooding and Russified large portions of Siberia and what is today Kazakhstan. These are the wages of military defeat, and what is being done to white America in terms of the only racial group that can be legally discriminated against, who has financial disadvantages in terms of getting any government money or getting a business approved, who is prohibited from the kind of ethnic organization that all people throughout all of recorded human history have always engaged in, whose resources are being drained directly from tax burden and indirectly from unequal trade treaties. These are the wages of military defeat that white Americans are paying despite not having lost a single battle, heck, not having fought a single battle against these groups that we are paying tribute to. This is also why describing mass immigration to the United States as left-wing or anti-nationalist is cripplingly stupid. If you think this, that mass immigration is anti-nationalist or left-wing, it just shows how incredibly narrow and parochial your thinking is. And another topic, the unequal trade policy the United States is engaged in with the rest of the world is the kind of policy that had to be imposed upon China via military action in the Opium Wars. Now, don't feel too sorry for China, as China did the same thing to their neighbors for hundreds of years prior when China had the ability to do so. The difference here is that our own brilliant economists are working very hard to give us the kind of trade policy that usually has to be forced on a militarily defeated country at gunpoint. A policy which is designed to turn your country into a resource pig for the industries of the conquering country. There's this old Japanimation called Neon Genesis Evangelion that has a good allegory for what I'm talking about. It's a cartoon for children, don't watch it. But early in the series, there are these angels, and they're basically coming down to destroy the planet. And they're being repelled by humans piloting these biomechanical giant robo-monsters. At first, the angels attack very directly, with brute force. But over the time, the angel attacks get weirder and weirder. And toward the end of the series, the angel takes the form of a mist that infects one of the human-piloted giant robots, and psychological attacks that makes the human pilots fall into a catatonic depression, or the form of a virus that affects the whole compound, or the form of a person who convinces everyone else that he's part of their team, and he then infiltrates the whole operation and takes over one of the robo-monsters and tries to destroy the human defenses. And at no point is there some debate as to whether or not this angel attack toward the end of the series is something to be fought against. At no point do they go, well, this virus isn't attacking us directly, it's becoming part of us. And what right do we have to say that they're not part of... No, they quickly and immediately tried to kill every form of attack the moment it was recognized. And our brilliant Republicans in Congress have been like someone who is opposed to the angels who attack in a very brute and direct way, but they're fine with angels so long as they attack indirectly. In fact, these Dr. Strangelove types in the Republican Party go out of their way to invent non-existent hard power threats while bending over backwards to not just accommodate, but actively promote the real enemy within. When Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, and Greece militarily achieved their independence from Turkey, the Turks were out. Turkish communities who had been there for 500 years, who had never been to Turkey and didn't speak Turkish, well, tough fucking luck. You're a Muslim, you're a Turk, you're gone. And if you don't kick the Turks out, well, what precedent does that set? Oh, well, they've been here a long time, so they can stay now. This gets to the question of existence. Let's say you've got all sorts of liberal and humanitarian notions, and don't kick the Turks out because they've been there a long time. Okay, well, the Turks, when they take territory, they kick you out, even though you've been there a long time. So what would be the result over time of the Turks kicking you out of land that they conquer, and you not kicking the Turks out of land that you conquer? To ask such a question is to answer. The Turks would eventually just take over everything, because you have all sorts of stupid little notions. Today, Turkey has organizations promoting Turkish migration into European countries, those stupid enough to let them in. In the past, Turkey would have had to militarily defeat Germany to open Germany's borders, but today, they just walk right in. And if you want to say that I'm in an old way of thinking, I'm stuck in the past, that in the new world, all the old lessons and ideas of control and power struggles between states, corporations, religions, and races and ethnicities, that this is all over and a new rainbow coalition is in, well, the burden's on you to show that this brave new world actually exists, because these kinds of claims were made in the Soviet Union and in Maoist China. And the Soviet Union just ended up being the Russian Empire painted red, replete with mass Russian migration into the conquered territories and forcing non-Russian ethnic groups to speak Russian, just as China has done under Mao to Hanify the whole area. Manchuria used to be a separate people with a language as distinct from the Han as Korean is today, and they were Hanified. And Cantonese is slowly being replaced by Han, and the Tibetans are being physically dispossessed by mass Han migration. Free Tibet, that's a left-wing cause, but Keep Britain White, oh, that's a right-wing cause. Of course, I'm sure you can find stories and professionals who will form the intellectual pretzels you need to justify this double standard. There always are. Just as in the 1800s, the government of Prussia hired intellectuals to justify all the weird political machinations that Prussia had to do to ultimately take over Germany. These kinds of intellectuals have always existed, and they will always exist to justify whatever silly double standard you have. And what about those brave communist revolutionaries who thought they were building communism, who sacrificed everything for what they thought was the people's revolution, but really just ended up being ethnic empires in Russia and China? Well, that's what happens to what I call notional thinkers. Yes, peoples whose minds are filled with all sorts of cute little values and syllogisms, like our great friends, the libertarians, who end up defending Twitter and Facebook's right to ban anyone from their platform because they're private companies. Right? Yes, they're private companies, and end up supporting open borders and just generally avoid thinking in proper nouns. Lenin and Stalin, for part of his career, thought they were going to use Russia to advance communism, but in reality, Russia used communism to advance Russia. Back in the day, you had dumb shitlibs who thought by supporting the Soviet Union they were supporting communism. No, you were supporting Russian supremacy. And today you have those same kinds of people who think they're going to use brown people to create whatever it is they think socialism is. But in reality, they're just tools for Mexican nationalism and a kind of pan-Indio racial nationalism on top of that, to the extent those people get along. That for now aligns with the blacks in the United States, but in the future is going to throw the blacks to the side once they've outlived their usefulness, just as they did in Cuba and the Dominican Republic, when those regimes don't have any real need to form any kind of political coalition with the blacks. And these same kinds of people who were cheerleading for the Russian Empire in the 20th century thought they were supporting communism because they thought the Soviet Union was communism, or cheerleading mass Muslim immigration to Europe today and imagine they're supporting tolerance or anti-racism, when really they're just supporting a kind of religious supremacy and the influence of particular Muslim states such as Turkey. Oh, I support mass Mexican immigration. I'm left-wing. No, you're just a useful idiot. Hey, thanks for watching till the end. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing via YouTube and be sure to click the bell to make it more likely that you'll be notified. But also you can subscribe with an RSS feed or with a Chrome extension I use called YouTube Notifications. If you like this video, please consider donating to my Patreon, which charges on a per video basis. I don't spam videos. They all take anywhere from 12 to 30 hours to make. You can also donate via PayPal or Maker Support. And stay tuned for my upcoming video, The Case for Reparations. If you're new to this channel, it's not what you think. If you're a longtime fan, then you probably know the twist. Again, thanks for watching.